Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 294 of CryptoBiography, and it's part one of a longer story this time. So we've had several one-episode, sort of one-shot stories, and those are fun. And I don't really ever try to plan ahead on how long a story is going to be. I always try to let it be whatever length it needs to be to tell it, because why not? Because, I control it. It's not like I have someone hanging over my shoulder telling me to make things longer or shorter. And so, why not, let the story breathe if it needs to breathe, or keep it tight if it should be tight. So, in this case, it definitely is going to be a multi-parter, and we're going to start with this one. So, I hope you enjoy it, and here we go. The Brick Wall. Carson Brax was a bull of a young man when smallpox took his mother, father, and younger brother. He buried them, and then the bank took the farm. So he left for New York City with only a few silver dollars in his pocket. His 18th birthday was not long after that, the 27th of December, and 4 days after that, he celebrated the year 1900 with 100 boisterous strangers at a bar near the room he had rented in Brooklyn. He almost had fun, but drank too much and woke up late, feverish, and a little afraid that he might have caught something like his family had caught. He'd been looking for work, but the drinking had taken most of his remaining money, and so he finally took the only work he could find, cleaning stables. Mr. Littleman, the stable owner, had him hard at work. He was, at present, the only stable hand, though usually there had been two. He was so strong and so used to this sort of work that he could handle it, though it took almost all his time. He spent so much time in the stables that he hardly met anyone new. Half a year passed, and it was in the sweltering summer before anything else of note happened to Carson. Stables always stink in summer, and this was no different. In fact, the city ones were worse, because they were built on stone rather than dirt, without drain or grade, and so the excrement had nowhere to go, though he of course swept and cleaned and washed as best he could. He was taking a break, having taken a bucket of water from the local tap for his own use. He drank deeply and poured water over himself to cool off. His thin shirt stuck to his skin, and he stretched, feeling the fabric pull against his back. Then he started to refill the bucket. There was a young boy nearby, an urchin of the streets he had seen once recently, here at the tap. He was looking at Carson with an oddly intent look on his face. He was considering to ask him why he was staring at him when the boy seemed to make up his mind about something. He turned and scampered off. Carson didn't bother to follow. That evening, when he closed the stables and put the key in Mr. Littleman's door slot, there was a man there. The boy he had seen was backing around the corner. "May I have a moment of your time?" he asked Carson. Carson just took a moment to look at the man. He was in his 50s or early 60s, tall, though not nearly his height, and strongly built for his age. He had a waxed mustache and wore a nice-looking, to Carson's eyes anyway, suit and tie. "I've had a long day. What is this about?" Carson asked. He was walking, but not so fast as to outpace the man. He was going over to the tap again for a quick wash before going home. "I run a gymnasium," the man said. Carson paused a moment, then started washing. "I'm creating a stable of boxers to take advantage of the new excitement surrounding the sweet science. I look at you, I see a guy just in from the country, well-fed, well-built, but without a lot of prospects. I can give you that. Make good money, draw the eyes of some lovely young women. The world could be yours." Carson finished washing. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, Jake Abernathy." "Abernathy, I'll have to think about it. It's a tough game, boxing. I'm not sure it's worth the trouble." "Of course. Well, you think about it. Maybe you got something else on the horizon, young, strong guy like you, something better than swabbing out stables. Or you join my stable. We clean you up, get you ready to fight, set you loose on the world. Anyway, think about it. My place isn't far, just up on 7th, near Barry. Can't miss it. Abernathy's Gymnasium." "Well, thank you, Mr. Abernathy." "Of course, son. What was your name?" "Carson Brax." Good name. I can see it up on a marquee now." With that, Jake Abernathy turned and walked away in the direction he had said his gym was. Carson just shook his head. He didn't have much money, but he knew boxing was a rough gig. He was proud of being literate, and sometimes got a newspaper from people in the neighborhood when they were done with it. He'd read about the boxing matches, and had noticed how often they ended with one or both boxers being injured. On Sundays, the library opened late, but it was his only day off. It was not close to his rented room, but nonetheless he walked there each Sunday to read, browse, and borrow books. He had eclectic tastes and read from many classics, histories, and biographies, but also more recent works of Arthur Conan Doyle, Mark Twain, and Robert Louis Stevenson. He particularly likes Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde and had a bit of a predilection for horror. Shelley's Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, he considered his favorite novel. But more recently he'd been digging into all kinds of crime stories, having finished the Sherlock Holmes stories and finding other mysteries and crime stories, both fictional and real. He was returning home with an obscure crime novel. The act of reading a lot of parts of similar works over the last few hours had left him in a bit of a paranoid state. The first thing he had noticed was the same urchin who had brought Mr. Abernathy to him, or more to the point, brought him to the attention of Mr. Abernathy, and he was eyeing him as he walked out of the library. He looked back at the boy, who disappeared around a corner. He was in a haze of thinking about the crime stories he'd been reading about, the book he wanted to get to reading once he got home, before the late summer sun went down, and wondering vaguely what the boy was following him for, and if it had anything to do with Abernathy, when he bumped into someone. He immediately went for his wallet, knowing that bumping into someone was one of the old distractions for pickpockets. But his wallet was still there. He looked down. There was a young woman, about his age, sitting on the ground, looking a bit put out. "Sorry," he mumbled, put out a hand to help her up. She took it, and her tiny hand looked like a doll's in his massive grip. He pulled her up, almost without effort, and apologized again. "I will try to look out better." "I should hope," she said, and looked him up and down. "You're a tall one." "Yes," he agreed. He'd always been a little bit shy about talking about his height and strength, which seemed to be the only topics anyone who met him wanted to discuss. But with a brain on top of all that beef," she added, pointing with her chin at the book in his hand. "What you readin'?" "Crime story," Carson said. "Haven't started it yet, though. Just came back from the library." "Well, what do you do for fun?" she asked. "This is it," he said, waggling the book. "Nothing else?" "I have a beer sometimes when I can afford it." She said. The pause allowed him a moment to look at her more closely. She was thin, of average height, but rather, to his mind, attractive. She had hair that bounced in wide curls, large dark eyes, and a small mouth in a shape that reminded him of a butterfly. "Well, good to know you can be sociable. I'm Lydia. Lydia Williams." "Hi, Lydia. Carson Brax." "Brax? You sure it isn't Bricks?" "Yeah, you like a wall of bricks, especially when a gal runs into you." "Oh," he said, and felt himself flushing, despite himself. "No, it's Brax." "I'm kidding, Carson, kidding. You new in town? You don't sound like you're from Brooklyn." "I'm not. I'm from out west." He left it vague. "Well, let me be the first to welcome you to the big city. How about we meet for a drink, say next Saturday? What bar do you frequent?" Oh, he thought, wondering if he could actually afford drinks for him and for Lydia in less than a week. But she seemed to read his mind. "I can afford my own drinks. I'd like to chit-chat with you. How about 9 o'clock? Which was your bar?" Sure," he said, a little relieved. If she was paying for her own drink, then this wasn't a date, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. "O'Shaughnessy's, over on 6th. I know that place. See you Saturday at 9, Carson Brax." "See you," he said, but couldn't think of anything else to say. By the time he had, she had turned and was walking at a brisk city pace in a direction away from where he was going. "Bye, Lydia." Lydia Williams, he reminded himself, not wanting to forget. He wasn't thinking about the crime novel on the rest of the way home. And that's the end of the first part. I hope you're enjoying it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2023, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.